I work at an aquarium. That's my normal 9 to 5, and then my two off days are Tuesday, Thursday, in which I teach classes at a local community college. So
Mm.
yeah, so
So
who needs weekends?
You haven't had a day off since when? The Obama administration?
If I answer that, I'll probably date myself.
Yeah, now I'm aging you.
So
I mean, even as I said that, I was like, oh, I'm making assumptions about the fact that I think
I
you are all
all
working
right.
men, but okay, yeah.
I'll do it. I'll throw myself on the fire here. I started college um in the year that we had the election between the proto-fascist and the email lady. So
Is it bad that it was like, oh, well, there's actually, but yes, I know you start. Okay, so you're very young. What are you talking about? Oh my gosh.
yeah, I'm only 27. So
Oh, okay. All right.
yes.
All right. All right. Forget
Um,
the Obama part then. That's okay. I'm gonna dox myself or whatever. Let's see, I started college during the election between the guy we used to think was the worst president ever and the guy who should have been president if you go by the popular vote.
okay.
And
All right.
and the one where we got hanging chads. I'm infinity years old, is what I'm trying to say.
Um, I I am assuming you mean 2000.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
Yes.
indeed.
Okay. So Bush
Yes.
versus Gore.
That's the one.
I have since read. So my understanding of that time period, based on being uh, not cognitively around for it,
Right.
um, is that like you know
I just
things.
want to say, hearing you refer to it as that time period is a little bit jarring for me. I was
I
like, oh,
apologize. The
what?
early 2000s, the aughts.
Oh, Lord.
But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like when I hear people talk about it, like it's mostly like for the most part fine, not nearly as crazy or as seemingly polarized as today. We'll talk about that in a little
Well
bit.
done. Yeah.
um but like I was reading, as I said earlier, I'm a miserable person. I only read nonfiction, and in one of my files on here is like papers on like technical
Mm,
literature on conspiracy theories.
mm.
And one of them that I read not too long ago was how uh, ferociously the Bush administration cracked down on climate change research. So,
Sure.
like, denied funding, or not him specifically,
Mhm.
but people in his administration, like fighting the release of works, fighting
Mhm.
against like public speakers and things like this. And of course, you had like Jim Inhofe with the "I'm a snowball," so
Mhm.
global real.
Mhm.
Um, and uh, and of course, it's wild that that happened, given that like his dad was the one who set in motion the events that led to the IPCC.
Yeah.
So like, what the
Yeah.
heck?
Well, I will say all your nonfiction miserable traits are paying off because your understanding of the dark ages when I was a college student is a robust one. I had forgotten about the snowball and I lived through it. So you're right. Yeah. I also, you'll know this better than I, but it was at some point in the early aughts, maybe this was late 90s, but I think this could have been a Bush move. the move was going from global warming, like we changed the language because it was global warming when I was little. And then we said,
Mm,
no, 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 we're going to say climate change. And I wonder now if that was part of trying to weasel around this crackdown
mm.
on, so, oh, Bush is all worried about global warming. Like we'll call it climate change instead. I could be wrong about that, but that would explain the shift. Yeah. I mean, you're right that we were less polarized. One reason we were less polarized, I think, I don't have the numbers on this part, but nothing unites a country like 9/11.
Mm.
His approval ratings were not good. Better than current ratings in general. Presidents were higher rated back then, but and then I tied an onion to my belt. I sound 1,000 years old. I don't know if you're a Simpsons person. Are you a Simpsons person? That was a Simpsons reference. It's
I
insane if you don't know it.
have watched a little
Oh, okay.
Simpsons.
Okay. Well,
I
not
was
like it's
more
insane for you,
Family
but
Guy.
I sound insane if you don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, yeah. His approval rating skyrocketed after 9/11, and it's
Mm.
like it's the whole, I mean, this is sci-fi, not that I mean, you've seen it, like we were united against a common enemy for a short while. Not long after that, there were protests against the various invasions and wars, and so we kind of drifted apart. But you're right that we were less polarized.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah. I'm a Chomsky fan. When I saw that
Yeah.
he was one of the early anti-Afghanistan people, I was like,
Mhm.
yoink.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, that's I have read about that. The people who I talk to who are mostly fairly liberal leaning people are like, yeah, you kind of had to toe the line when that
Mhm.
happened. Suddenly everyone, yeah, it's like the one and only time in recent history where you have that everyone united against a common threat.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas like I watch sci-fi movies and stuff now, and I like, man, half the country would be bitten by a zombie and just not tell anyone.
Oh, for
Uh,
sure.
you
For sure.
know,
Like The Walking Dead would not have even made sense because it should have been like half the people are just in denial that there are zombies or something like that.
right?
Yes. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a movie. It was Valerian. I may only read nonfiction, but I watch
Okay.
lots of
Yeah, yeah,
movies.
good. Good.
Um, um, but Valerian, I really love the opening of it because it's like it's Earth progressively coming together. It's like the
Mhm.
U.S. and the Soviets, or Russia, whoever in their other timeline was like,
Mm.
they come together, then China, then Japan, then you have your most technologically advanced countries, then your lesser technologically advanced countries, and then like everyone's united, and then the aliens come.
Yeah.
And I like that. I really like that intro, but yeah, I think we have a fair proportion of our population that thinks space isn't even real. So
Right.
like,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
Have
no,
you
I do want to come back to that also a bit later.
Yeah. Have you I know you haven't read it, but have you and I haven't seen the show, but between our powers combined, we can put it together. The three body problem, have you read that or seen that? Oh, okay.
No,
That's
sorry.
it is something of a thought experiment of like if we have awareness that there could be alien life that is a threat to us, would that unite people or
Mm,
not? And if it doesn't, what does that look like? And it sort of plays out what you're describing, where it's like there's sort of different factions, like kind of in a don't look up sort of way, where they're just like, no, it's not happening, or like, yes, they're going to be our friends, or oh, we need to, basically map the rhetoric we have in the US about immigration to aliens. Like it gets thorny fast.
we're going so in a different direction from
Sorry.
where. No, it's totally fine. But I do. There was one. Um, y- oh, did I lose it? I may have lost it. Maybe it'll come back to me. I do like that. Yes, it probably does map onto like current climate. Um, I lost it. I forgot where I
Okay.
was going with that. But gonna make
I
me
will
mad.
say one difference. Well, we don't have to, I don't want to
Oh, I
spoil the
do
book.
remember.
Yes, here we go. Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Have you heard of the dark forest hypothesis?
I have, but you'll have to remind me what it is. It sounds extremely familiar.
This is the idea that there are lots of alien civilizations, but they are all hidden from each other out of fear that someone might try to gobble up the other civilizations, basically. Like
Oh.
if we figure out that like there are others, do we just like nuke them immediately? Be like, nope,
Right.
that's a problem, and then
Right.
just wipe them out.
Right.
And so that like all the civilizations are all out there, but they try to minimize their
Oh, interesting.
outreach to others.
Sort of like a Cold War, if it never even got started, kind of thing. It's like a because it's either mutually assured destruction or
Mm.
like some kind of existential threat if someone finds out we exist. So does that in that are we the only idiots like sending beacons out or whatever it is that we're like occasionally sending various missives with
Yeah.
like music clips and stuff or whatever it is that we send?
Yeah,
Like
that's an interesting question,
we're
right?
just big
Are we the
suckers
only
in the
ones?
galaxy. Yeah. Everyone is like, God, these people are. It's like I'm the gazelle at the watering hole who's like, I'm a gazelle. Like, hey, here I am. As
They don't
opposed
even
to,
know how to hide themselves, you
yeah,
know?
like they're idiots. Yeah. They're too dumb for us to bother to kill.
You're right. That could be the case, yeah.
I like that as like a sci-fi movie or book though, that it's just sort of like humans eventually are just killed because we're just dumb and we're just like putting our it's sort of like in the murder mystery where everyone goes and hides and we just sort of sit in the living room and we're like, where'd everyone go? And then we just get killed. Like that's the whole movie.
Yeah.
So I don't write scripts, which is a good thing, I think.
Yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yet.
Yes.
Um, so for our viewers who might not know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. My name's Andrea. I have a PhD in political science and taught political science for many years. And then I switched to teach data science mainly because I love data and I like applying it to everything, not just politics, but politics is the main area that I apply data. So I taught data science at NYU for a really long time. I've also worked at Nate Silver's 538 when it existed, RIP.
Mhm.
And I do like data science consulting. Basically, if you have like an interesting social, mostly so, I have a bias towards social science, with respect towards the other sciences. If you have like a social or human related question that we either could get data on or there is data and we can sift through it, I'm interested. And so I've sort of done different things over the years that have taken the form of either like classroom teaching or working for companies. I do a lot of speaking and I have a podcast about data. I just really like turning the world into numbers and seeing what we see as a result of doing that. And I will also say that I have a long set of thoughts about how, in general, we're not very good at turning human related things into numbers. Some people are really, really good at it. I'm biased towards the academics, but there's a lot of companies that churn out a lot of data that I think is not so amazing. So if you ever want
Mm.
to bitch and moan about, I don't know if I can swear on here, but complain
Yeah,
about data
absolutely.
and like
You
data
say whatever you
quality.
want.
Yeah. All right, great. Yeah, so I do a lot of like you think you want to build a machine learning, whatever, but first you need to like fix the fact that none of these columns make any sense. Like, so that's sort of
Mm.
my spiel in the data world is like evaluating data and understanding if it's any good. And so a lot of the work also that I do sort of more substantive is around like polarization and misinformation and the spread of information. And I've done a lot of research on censorship. So it's all kind of like the data literacy piece and then the actual politics piece like kind of go together where it's like, how do you tell what's real and how do you learn from data in a way that isn't ending up in flat earth territory and that good stuff.
Yeah, that's
I don't know
awesome.
if that's a sufficient overview. I don't have a good
Yeah,
elevator pitch. I need to work on that. Like I'm a XYZ.
I thought it was great, and
Well,
it
thanks.
does a lot of what you said. Hit on things that I read your piece in the Daily Beast about,
Nice.
or one of your pieces of, uh,
Yeah.
um, the one that you have on your website. I read a couple of your technical papers in preparation for this. So yeah.
All right.
So yes, it's all very very interesting to me.
I don't think
Um,
many people read the technical papers, so well done to you for doing that.
it's funny you say that. I have a friend named Zach Hancock. He
Hmm.
does Talk Pop Gen here
Hmm.
on YouTube, and he puts out like a paper or two every year. He's a prolific
Wow.
writer, but one of his was on like the defanging of punctuated equilibrium, and and I read it and I was like, wow, this was a really interesting paper. Very well done. He goes, thanks. You're one of like three people who've read this now.
Yeah. Like I don't think my parents have read my technical paper. Like I'm not even sure my co-authors have read, whatever.
Yeah.
They have, but yeah, very few. So well done to you. And of course, in some cases, I don't know about mine, but I haven't read them in a while. But some are behind a paywall, so people really can't read them. But I'll email to
Yeah,
you if you need it.
behind paywall. Right. Yes. Right.
Right, right.
That's what I was saying, and
There's
I've
no
always
way
said
you would
that.
ever do anything to get around that at
Correct.
all. Ew.
I don't have right. Yes, I don't have any means or ways. At any
No.
rate,
Yeah. We're all very above
um,
board here, so naturally,
yes,
yeah.
always at Jackson Weed Incorporated. I thought that was interesting. The bit about the the big data,
Mhm.
how companies collect like mass amounts of data. One movie that really kind of like underscored that was Minority Report.
Oh, yeah. I'm
Uh,
in Minority Report. How's that for a fun fact?
really?
Yeah, I'm an extra, you can't really see me, but there's, like, 1 or 2 scenes where Tom Cruise, like, storms into the Precog building or whatever, which is the Ronald Reagan building in DC,
Hmm.
and, like, "Ah, there's Andrea," like, for an eighth of a second. So, well done.
That's
That movie almost
awesome.
never comes up, but yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I see that like clips. People always use clips from that movie, especially where he's walking past like a little kiosk and like the shoe comes up and it's like, "Don't you want to purchase this shoe?"
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
it's based on his past series of purchases, and so that they like predict this. And you probably saw it. There was a story that went viral a few years ago, or maybe it was a few years ago. It was a while back. That was on a woman who didn't know she was pregnant
Yep.
yet,
Yep.
but the um whatever program she was using was like, you're gonna want to purchase like baby bottles and a booster
Mhm.
seat and all this, and she was like, that's super weird. Why would I need
Mhm.
those things? Because it
Mhm.
like predicted that based on her series of past purchases and was like, okay, these things all correlate together, which means that
Yeah.
this is about to happen. What do you
Yeah.
think about stories like that?
It's I mean, the Minority Report one back in the era that I was alive, that no one else on this show was apparently. I guess you were alive, but you were a child. The ancient history of that. Yeah, I think it was actually very prescient, because that is exactly what the algorithms do, right? It's
Hmm.
very much, when I talk about how the algorithms work. I mean, no one knows exactly, it's proprietary, and it's really lots and lots of algorithms all talking to each other, not just one big one per social media feed, but it really is like, it's a little bit like driving through the rearview mirror, in the sense that it's the, I like looked at a shoe once, and for 3 more days I'm going to get nothing but shoe ads. But the future telling part is very creepy, and I have heard the one about the woman who she didn't know, but got all those ads. There's another one, I don't know if it's the same one or a similar conversation that was circulating, where a woman, no, or like she was kind of like a high school student, like she knew she was pregnant and had done some like shopping at Target, and then Target started sending her a bunch of ads, but it went to her parents' house, so her parents
Mm,
found out. So there becomes this like, one is like, oh, it's sort of creepy, and the other is like, oh, there's something of a privacy issue, where it's like, I mean, she was a minor, so it is different, but
right.
I mean, the same thing has happened to me. I moved about 2 years ago, and about 3 years ago, when I started looking to move, I started getting all these Instagram ads for like washable rugs. Nothing but like, you need a new rug and you want to be able to put it in the washer. And I was like, I've never looked for a rug. I don't want a rug. Why would I want a rug? And then I moved and I got to my new place and I was like, I need a rug. And then I was like, oh no, the algorithm knew like 10 months ago that I was going to need a rug. Out of principle, I haven't bought those rugs, but no, it's extremely creepy. I mean, one of the things that I also think about is like, there's there's a difference between like prediction and explanation. So I think these algorithms are really, really, really good at prediction. Like, they could predict that I
Hmm.
want a rug, they could predict that this person was pregnant, they could predict, whatever. But that's not the same thing as us getting a better understanding of, the machine doesn't know why I want a rug, right? And there's
Hmm.
no way to like, so if you think of like, if you can predict if someone gets cancer, but we're less good at predicting why they're going to get cancer, so it gets to this point where you're like, how valuable, it's sort of like knowing the future, but like you can't change it, right? So it's like, how valuable is this prediction if I don't know why I have it and I can't change the future? um
Yeah.
so the prediction stuff is very, very good, but the causality stuff, I think we're not as good at.
Okay. Um, Omar Zak says, we studied that case in business school. It's worse. She was a minor and her dad threatened the store. Yeah, because they sent her the prenatal
Yes, that's what
catalog.
it was. Yep. Well done, Omar. That's exactly right. I remember it was I forget what year it was, but it was a very early on, where you're like, oh wow, like we have unleashed something a bit more sinister than we realized at this
Mm,
point. I mean, there's other aspects of this too, where it's like, you know, if you share any kind of like internet account, like sometimes I can see weird things that like my boyfriend has looked up, you know, and it's like all of a sudden like you know, and the phone's listening to us. So that we just don't know. I mean, one of the things that's so frustrating and terrifying in a way about these corporations with the algorithms is that we don't know what's in those algorithms. Like there's a huge culture around transparency and open source and shared data and all that stuff in academia, but it's a free for all in a lot of the corporate world where it's like, I don't know what data they're looking at. I don't know how they're processing it. And it's eerily good a lot of the time. Sometimes it's insulting. I get a lot of like, this algorithm will predict what wine you want based on your personality. And you're like, bro, like, stop it. Like, I know that I am a white woman, but like, you don't have to hit me on the head with it. So
Yeah.
sometimes they can be, you know, you end up in like stereotype territory. I don't know if you get anything like that. Where you're like,
Right.
what kind of basic person do you think I am? I mean, obviously I did do the wine test, but uh
Not in that regard. I mean, I do get ads that in on some things that are like, well, now that I think about it, I don't know. Most of my online purchases are books.
nice.
Uh, I don't purchase a lot of like clothes or furniture or stuff online,
Yeah.
so it hasn't yet been able to like dig its hooks into me.
Nice.
Um, but maybe one day, you know.
Well done to you. Yeah.
You did remind me with the washable rug. I saw a meme that was like, I purchased a toilet seat one time on
Mhm.
Amazon, and now it only recommends me Amazon toilet seats. Like, no, I'm not going to buy one as a treat. You know?
Right, right. I think I saw that or a meme version of that that was like, check out this great like YouTuber who does like reviews of toilet seats and like you're gonna want. And it's just like this ecosystem. You're like, I just want one, and I'm never like I did that. I recently bought like a new pan, and then I've just been pushing pans at me, and it's like I don't need more pans. So there are these eerie predictions, but a lot of it is like I said before, it's sort of like the driving through the rear view mirror. It's like it's all
Hmm.
just like a little step behind. And it's like, oh, they like this. Let's give them 10 infinity more of those. And you know, early on with even with like Amazon recommenders, when it was like regular old books and Netflix recommenders and Spotify, like sometimes the algorithm, I get really worried because, and this gets to polarization in a sense, because you do just sort of confirmation bias your way through the internet, where it's like, I looked at pots, so I'm getting an onslaught of pots. But it's like, where's the model that can predict, and maybe this was the rug example, like can predict that actually what I really need is a pony. You know, when am I going to see that? And they're just never going to get out of it because you're kind of stuck in your own. You get very typecast very fast by the
Hmm.
algorithm, and you get very little like just random things that you wouldn't otherwise see. And then that's where you end up in the like everyone agrees with me politically on all the things, and that's how you come to have strange beliefs because you're just never exposed to the beliefs that you're not.
Well, they must be because I'm always right. I mean, they
Yeah,
can't disagree with
exactly. I was
me.
like, everyone on the internet agrees with me. I don't know why we can't get it together. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
That's what I'm trying to tell them on Twitter all the time. You know, it's
exactly,
very frustrating.
exactly.
Um,
Well, and the algorithm also rewards, you know, and maybe you already know this, but less so advertisements, but as far as like peer to peer posting, like it rewards outrage and it rewards emotion because you're much more likely to
hmm,
engage. Like if I'm really angry or scared, that's when I'm going to start clicking on stuff. If I and then forwarding it and commenting it, like if I really like it, I might forward like a kitten falling asleep to my brother, and that's sort of the end of it. Whereas the raucous stuff is what escalates. So it's all just ads for what we just bought and people screaming.
yeah, I've heard or seen a lot of talk about the effects of rage bait, you know,
Yeah.
and clickbait, of course. And there was, I don't know if you know him. There's a channel called Big Joel, and he did a video a little while back on the insane stuff that Kanye has said in recent
Mm,
years and some of the conservative responses to it,
mm,
because they're like not entirely sure how to respond to some of it,
mhm,
given the uh, audience of some of these
mhm,
groups. But it was very interesting to me that he talked about that one of the guys who was commenting on it, Michael Knowles, was like, well, 10 years ago, the thing that you could say that was like the craziest thing was like denying that trans people exist. And
mm,
now is like we've progressed past that point, so to where that like that's not really a crazy thing anymore. And now it's the next craziest thing you could say is like that you support the,
mhm.
you know, the, like Nazis, for instance, or something like
Right,
that.
right,
And I
right.
thought that was very just a moment of like pure lucidity there, you know?
Horrifying lucidity. But yeah,
Yeah,
no, it is very, there's this sort of this like window of like tolerability or acceptance. I mean, you hear it when you talk about like with comedy, like what can you joke about and what can you not joke about? And like it's for the most part not funny to joke about trans people because trans people exist and people don't just mentioning a trans person isn't going to get a laugh. In some
mhm,
circles it might. So the same thing happens in politics where it's like we used to never say this and now we're totally fine with it. And the other, I mean, usually when we think about it, usually it's an arc towards we're less okay with things. Like I'm being very living in the past, but like when in the early 2000s, we would say
the good
like
old days, you know?
we would say yeah, make America great again. Paris Hilton era. We would say like gay to mean something bad. I was just talking about
Right.
this with my boyfriend, and we're like, that's gay, this is gay. And I did that. And it wasn't until I was in college and I was a dance minor. Thank you so much. And many of my classmates were gay. And I was like, I maybe shouldn't say this. So in general, we think the arc moves towards you say less and less because you sort of realize what's become, and we would think like, I wonder what else we're saying that's going to be in 10 years. We're gonna be like, oh, you shouldn't say that. But
Mm,
in now it's going the other way where we're like, we're kind of okay with all the stuff that he said and like being a Nazi, like people, it's the whole like the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice.
mm,
Uh, lulls us into a sense that we don't actually have to do anything to bend it towards justice. That it just sort of will. You're like, nope,
yeah.
we're out here saying the N word now. We're like, okay,
Right, the R slur is really returned in fashion, it seems
yeah,
like,
yeah.
mm, yeah, there are, you're right, it seems that the arc is moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah,
It's
there is an
sometimes it
arc, but
seems like.
it's a more of a maybe it's a sine curve that hopefully is like still upwards, but we're not it's not clear at all.
Yeah, um, so, since we're on, topic of political polarization, I read earlier your article, in the Daily Beast, why everything you think about polarized America is wrong, and I would know, and I thought that some aspects of it were very interesting, but also in line with, hello? My camera?
You've I can hear you perfectly, but
There we
you're
go.
there you go. Yeah.
Um, happens like 2 or 3 times a show.
Nice.
Um, the one of the graphs that you show early on in the article I thought was very interesting
Hmm.
is that the movement of liberal politicians, of Democrat politicians, has stayed largely the same. The the the
Yes.
the curve, the bell curve, it kind of stays in more or less the same location since the 90s. But with the conservatives, you see this rightward shift of,
Mm-hmm.
of the bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that a little bit, please?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I also want to state for the record that the title of the article was assigned by someone else. I did not write the title of the article. I would never say the phrase, and I would know. I don't have that kind of confidence. So
Was
even
the
as you were reading it,
editor?
I was like, oh, don't say the full thing. That title. When they published it, I was like, oh, the title makes me sound very annoying. Maybe I sound annoying anyway, but that,
No.
anyway, it's, but the idea of the paper, of the article, is it's a summary of really decades of political science research trying to understand and really pinpoint how political polarization, is showing up in the United States. And the idea is that around the 2000s, with the Gore Bush that I can't stop talking about, there was a notice that like, oh, we seem to be kind of more hostile towards each other, and we seem to really doesn't. And by the time I was in grad school, and Obama's in power, it was like pretty outwardly like there's people on the left and there's people on the right, and they do not talk to each other. And so there was like pretty much widely accepted narrative that we still have today, which is that we are polarized. And so political scientists were like, yeah, it does seem like we're polarized. How can we actually find some evidence to document this polarization, and we can actually put a number on it and blah, blah, blah. And what was interesting was that it turned out that political scientists trying to document polarization in the United States kept coming up empty handed. It was very difficult to find data that actually substantiated the argument that we have become ideologically polarized, that we are way far on the left and we're way far on the right, and there's no overlap. Now, the graph you're referring to is referring to our leaders. So there's when we
Hmm.
talk about polarization, we'd say, well, who's polarized? Is it our leaders? Is it Congress? Or is it the American people? So the story is more complicated for the American people. But for Congress, it's actually upsettingly straightforward. which is exactly what you described. So that particular research, one of the first attempts to quantify polarization in the United States, said, well, let's start with members of Congress. They every day go and do roll call votes. So you put forward a bill and everyone decides if they're going to vote yay or nay on it. And if you could just go through, and at this time it was manual, you could go through and code each bill as like how left leaning and how right leaning it is. And of course, that's an oversimplification. But let's say in terms of like fiscal left right, you could mark that, and then you could say, well, they agreed or they disagreed. So you could get what they call like an ideological score for each member of Congress. And you can do that because it's a public record all the way back, years and years and years. So what you're referring to is you can basically graph like a distribution, and it is basically a bell curve of both Democratic members of Congress and Republican members of Congress, and say generally what is their ideological distribution look like. And most people on the left are on the left and like around the middle, and then there's a few far to the left and a few far to the right. Same on the right. And exactly as you're describing, if you map it forward in time, as you get closer to the present, you start to get to 2008, 2010, 2012, the right, and I don't know if my left or right are showing up the right way, it's probably opposite on the screen. The right just drifts super far. And so if we are all sitting around saying, well, it feels like the right, because I am left leaning myself, like it feels like the right has lost their minds. Yeah. As far as the leaders go, yes, quantitatively, they are way further to the right than people on the left, leaders on the left have moved to the left. There's been a little bit of a drift, but not really. And the other piece to note in this graph is that there used to be, it was sort of like two, not quite normal distributions, but two bell curves. And it used to be that the tails would overlap, where there was like a fair amount of Republicans whose views were actually more liberal than the conservative Democrats. And that was the area where members of Congress could talk to each other and we could compromise. And I don't remember exactly what year it is, but I want to say maybe 2012 or so. I'd have to look at the graph. The gap opens up where there is no it's hard to even say because it doesn't exist anymore, but like there is no Democrat that's more conservative than the most liberal Republican, right? Does that make sense? Right. And so that gap is basically like why we can't see eye to eye in Congress. That story is not the case among the American people. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the story in Congress. If you think that the Marjorie Taylor Greens and all of that and have dragged everyone to the right, the answer is they have.
So that's kind of the what. Is there really a how or a why?
So really good question. And so that comes to, well, how do these people get into office? Well, they get into office because they're elected by all of us. That's how you get this job. And, there's some endogeneity there where you're like, we elect them because someone up there thought that they would be electable and blah, blah, blah. But in general, we'd say, okay, why are our leaders drifting that way? Let's look at the voters. Are voters voting in ways that would support a view that we American people are ideologically polarized as well? If they're truly representing us, that means that we should be drifting that way as well. One piece of evidence, one clue, and it's so fun, I think, to sort of find different aspects of data to try to it's kind of like solving a crime, right? It's like you step upon a crime scene and you're like, this was this way and this was this way. So one of the first places you look is like, we don't vote every day on issues the way that members of Congress do, but we do vote every 2 or 4 years, depending on what type of election is going on. And you do see an increase in single ticket voting. So it used to be that Americans would vote some for Democrat candidates, some for Republican here and there. And you do see a bigger split. So you'd say, well, I don't know, we are more polarized, like we're divided. But the drift in political leaders could just explain that. Like, I'm not going to vote if there's overlap between Democrat and Republican leaders. I, a Democrat, might occasionally vote for a Republican leader because conceivably their viewpoint is closer to mine than a Democrat. It doesn't really explain it, because if the leaders are drifting apart, it makes sense that we would see more split ballots, even without our views changing. So that wasn't helpful. So then we say, well, we can ask people what they think about the issues or our party identification. And there's like very little movement. Like on average, the same number of people identify as Democrats and the same number of people identify as Republicans as they did decades ago. There's a little bit of an increase towards Republicans and a little bit of an uptick of more like strong leaning Democrats and strong leaning Republicans. But if anything, we see more independents in the US now than we used to. So the party ID, like, not there. If you look at our views on the issues, so you look at things like abortion, climate change, LGBTQ, gun control, size of government spending, all of those things in general, with the exception of 2 issues, I can talk about those, our views have not drifted meaningfully further apart. So if you say, do you think that there should be protections in place for, this is like a national survey run by the American National Election Study. It's a really great survey that's been running for decades. If you ask Americans questions like, do you think LGBTQ people should be protected, their rights should be protected by law? More Democrats than Republicans will say yes. But the gap between Democrats and Republicans is really not moving much over time. And in general, it's gone up, as we were talking earlier, over the last few decades, right? The same is true for government spending. Yes, of course, more Democrats think there should be government spending and Republicans think up. But like, it's not like we're like drifting like crazy. Like we're kind of just like still disagree as much as we do. Abortion is one where we see the right, and these are American people, not leaders. We see the right go up with us, and then we really see a drift. And climate change are two where we see like the actual ideological polarization that we think is going on. So okay, so maybe those two issues are driving our electing these extreme people. We don't know. The other story that has surfaced over the years is that it's less that we disagree ideologically, but if you ask, hey, Republicans, what do you think of Democrats? And hey, Democrats, what do you think of Republicans? Over time, there is a massive increase in what's called like out-group negativity or out-group hostility. We dislike each other way more. So if you ask us about the issues, particularly if you don't do any partisan priming, just say, hey, would you support a policy like this about common sense gun control? Would you support this sort of policy about jobs? Would you support this sort of policy about clean air? Like, take away the political buzzwords. Most Americans want middle ground policies, and we actually agree ideologically with everyday people a ton. But we hate the other side. Even if our ideological differences are super close, we're all left, we're all right, we don't have much overlap, but we're real close. And we could get to some really decent compromises on a lot of issues. We don't trust the other side, and this is true both ways. We don't trust the other side. We call them hypocrites. We think they're they're selfish and they're mean and they're like both sides. Like everything I think that's negative about the right, they think about me, whatever. Like I try to also separate my personal politics from the actual research. It's obviously difficult. Anyway, so all of that is to say, it could be that because we just hate each other, we're more inclined to support these more extreme candidates, maybe. But really, we don't know. We don't really know what's driving it. The other argument and the other piece of this is like, where does social media fit into this mix, right? Because it does make these more extreme people more high profile. I know names like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I don't know less extreme Republicans in Congress. I just don't know who they are. I don't know what they're up to. I don't know what they're talking about because it's not at the top of my feed, right? So it's still an open question, is like, why exactly are leaders drifting that way when it seems like most Americans are pretty moderate? And there've been some really interesting, I could monologue about this forever. I'll say this final thing and then I'll stop. There's been some really interesting work where what happens if you remove people's exposure to social media? So the Center for Social Media and Politics at NYU, led by Joshua Tucker and a couple other faculty members who do really great work, worth checking out. They did a study where ahead of a recent election, I forget exactly which one, they somehow got people to agree to not look at Facebook for a month leading up to the election. And they went into the election with I forget exactly what the measurable outcome was, but basically their views became much more moderate, whether they were on the left or the right. And their perceptions of polarization also decreased. So part of the problem with polarization is we think we're polarized, and therefore it becomes a fulfilling prophecy in a way.
I think I've seen some of those studies.
Like, we don't know exactly what it is about social media. I mean, we have hypotheses that's causing everyone to lose their minds, but we do know that if you stop looking at it, it moderates your views.
Yes. I think I saw, we did a no, that's not it. Does Brendan Nyhan, is he one of the people?
He's great. Yeah,
I found a couple of so his 2023 Nature paper, like-minded sources on Facebook are prevalent, but not polarizing, right? And it was basically that was one of the papers that found that. There were a couple of other ones, but it was kind of interesting that like part of that was like there's still people will still vote like conservative or liberal depending on like what they were going into it, but like it's not really super radically driving
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
left or right. At least from what I remember, it's been a while since I read those papers, but I thought that was interesting because it kind of cut against some of the um, hypothesizing about like why Trump got elected,
Right.
because there were a lot of journalists posing articles like, well, is it like Russian bots or trolls on
Mhm.
social media, that sort of stuff.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In general, my I'm not an expert on that area, but my read of the research on that is like, no, that wasn't really it. And
Mm-hmm.
if anything,
Yes.
it's sort of a scapegoat for like, actually, it's almost worse to think that our fellow citizens could vote for this guy. It's much more palatable to blame it on like a foreign person.
Yes.
So you can sort of try to talk yourself out of it. And we do that every election. Both sides do that. You know, it was like maybe it was this other, maybe it was rigged. You know, whatever it is that the lies we tell ourselves.
Yeah, we did a video titled um oh, what was that video titled? It was like asymmetric propaganda, I think was the name of
Mm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about one of the articles I came across in preparation for that video was how conservatives versus liberals have a much tighter network
Mm.
of sources that they rely
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Yep.
OAN, Fox,
Mm-hmm.
these are much more like self reinforcing, whereas
Mm-hmm.
liberals will read something that's more center, like they'll read
Yep.
New York Times or what have you. But then they'll also read something that's more left, and
Yeah.
they'll take this much wider range, and that was perhaps that's part of the reason that there's less of that ideological bent on the left, is they
Mm-hmm.
take in a much wider
Mm.
set of opinions. What do you think about that?
I've seen papers like that, and there's some pretty great in the sense of interesting, not great so much in the sense of
Yeah.
normatively great. But I've seen there's a lot of really interesting graphs about that you can do it for news sources, you can do it for accounts that follow each other on like social media or whatever. And yeah, you do see much more of a homogeneous and small cluster on the Republican side, and much wider on the left, and very little overlap. And so again, that's the breeding of distrust, and and another sort of piece of evidence around the American people is similar to the leadership, where we also know, while we do have a lot of views that are like, I might be a pretty centrist Democrat and you might be a pretty centrist Republican, and we might be very close on all the issues, there are very few Americans where there's actual ideological overlap, where we have individual people who I am liberal on guns and abortion, but conservative financially or something like that. Like, you don't see a lot of that. And so what that means is that you're just really never interacting with anyone who you disagree with at all, which is part of how you get into this like in-group out-group mentality, and you can become more hostile. It's sort of like, again, we were talking about immigration earlier. It's like, if you never interact with someone who has come to the US from overseas or internationally, you're much more prone to sort of think the worst of them or be afraid of them.
Hmm.
And you can do that for Democrats and Republicans, and we hate each other, and we probably never even talk to people from there. I try to be, I try to go out of my way to talk to people with different political views as me, but I live in New York City, and there's not a lot of that. I would be
All
interested, and
right,
I
you changed my mind. I'm coming up.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would be interested to see more recent work, because I would imagine that there's a case to be made that now, with like what a lot of scholars of social media call the TikTokification of social media, where it's like, it used
Mm,
to be it was your social network was who you heard things from, and our social networks, like my high school was pretty conservative, so I used to hear a lot more like conservative views. And then everything became like TikTok, where you start hearing from random people. You're not just hearing from your friends. And so what
right.
that means is the algorithm we were talking about before is just going to keep serving you views that you already agree with. And so you're just never even going to be exposed to those degrees. So where I'm going with that is, I would imagine that these days you're seeing some of that on the left. Like, I kind of tread in a couple of spaces online on the left, but I have friends who are only on the super far left. And I would be shocked if they're unsubscribing from the New York Times because it's too conservative, and they're
Right.
like ruling out news on TV because it's too conservative. And so I
Right.
think you might I think if we visualize it like a year from now, you would see more kind of like clusters on the left. And that could
Mhm.
actually be worse than the right, where it's like, at least it's all one big cluster where they're talking to each other. Whereas it's like the reality that I'm in as like a center left is totally removed from the far left. And then we have the infighting that leads to problems as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Um,
A
eh
scholar that I spoke with once, his name is Patrick Egan. He once described it to me. He's like, it's really less online, at least. It's less about like there's a left and a right online community. He was like, it's really more like the number is open for discussion, but it's like 16 different ecosystems of information. Like think of like
mhm.
the podcast bros as their own little world, and like of
Yeah.
course the OAN and those, and then there's like various conspiracies, and then there's like the call her daddy or whatever. I don't know what they all are, but it's almost like this big fragmentation online,
Sure.
um, on both sides. So it almost kind of, which kind of makes our elections even harder to predict, possibly.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's part of what or I'd be willing to bet that Trump got help in the last election from going into the podcast space.
Yes, I
'Cause I
think
think
so.
you're right. There are the overlap between conservative politicians and like podcasters is there's so much more overlap between them. I almost never see. I think I can think of like two examples. I think like okay, well, three. Okay, I think like the three biggest like leftist or left leaning channels on uh, podcasters, whatever. Now I'm seeing more of them like meeting politicians and stuff, but it seemed like conservatives really have
Mm-hmm.
dominate in that area. They are much more likely to do an interview with like Ted
Yep.
Cruz or whoever. I think yeah, I think you're totally right on that. I um did want to say I think it's fascinating that abortion and climate change are the two
Mm,
issues because in my mind those are two of the biggest areas that have the longest running like propaganda
mm.
campaigns. In the case of climate change, I mean, there's a whole book written on it. The Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway wrote Merchants of Doubt, which is
Mhm.
amazing. If
Mhm.
anyone hasn't read it, read that one, please.
Mhm.
Um, and then in the case of abortion, that was a major move by the conservative
Yep.
right in the well, it started in the late '60s, but it really took off in the '70s
Mhm.
as a response to desegregation, and then they had to shift focus as they kind of lost that battle.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so then they really congealed around this one issue.
Mhm. Yeah. No, and it's it's one of those where even then so some of the issues with the data is like we didn't really ask about all of these issues on a national level for a while. So for the LGBT one, for example, they weren't really asking anyone in the United States about LGBT rights until like
Mm,
1990. And so the lack of data on it is, and so I don't know how far abortion goes back, but it doesn't go all the way back to the 50s when the survey started. So in those early stages, we don't really have data around what people's views were on that. But I do think you're right that those are both issues that have really been tapped into in a in an emotionally triggering sort of way, like this sort of right to life. Like that's just been a conversation that I have been hearing since I was in middle school, where
mhm,
abortion is murder and da da da. No, it's not, and there's arguments. And so those have just been very fraught. And I think you're on the right track that it's deliberate whipping into a frenzy by particular interest groups that want to get people worked up about these things. And so those are two that we just cannot seem to get along with each other about. The climate change one is really interesting though, because and this again comes from this scholar Patrick Egan, who's done a lot of work around polarization and climate change. And he shows that, in a lot of states that are mostly red and therefore mostly like climate deniers or climate skeptics or whatever, you still actually see a lot of economic movement to support renewable energy, like because those
mhm,
are the states that are also best for solar power and wind power and all of these
right.
things. And so his hope is that, as long if you can shed the language of climate change, it kind of goes back to the global warming rebrand. If you can shed the language of climate change and just say, hey, we're just developing jobs and we all want cheap energy, it
Mhm,
it actually can move forward
mhm,
despite the ideological differences. Abortion is not quite the same way because you're
right.
either getting the abortion or you're not. There's not like a
Right.
green abortion or whatever. But there is hope on the climate change where it's like even if we hate each other, if we kind of get stuck economically, will just, there was a moment with the whole Trump Musk bromance where we were about to be
Right.
like the electric car was about to be like the big takeover in the United States,
Yeah.
but no such luck.
Yeah, that was that, I mean, I'd rather that it'd be anyone else other than Musk
Yes.
running
Yeah.
that, but you're right. That we had an opportunity. I mean, I think electric is only the way to go if we also change the energy source that we're using to
Yes.
make the electricity.
Yeah.
But you're right. That was and a one very small bright spot in an otherwise completely dark
Yeah.
tunnel. But yeah, that was something. I mean, Trump pulling, I mean, not just Trump. I mean, his administration pulling the plug on funding
Hmm.
for EV as well as solar and wind projects. So, it's kind of insane because from what I've seen, those are pretty typically uh across the board.
Hmm.
Everyone's like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
No,
want to
yeah.
not buy all of our solar panels from China. We want to be
Right.
energy independent or what have you.
Right, right. No, it is, and it goes back to the leadership question that you rightly asked about, where it's like, what's getting in the way of our ability to seek policy compromise, and because of the information ecosystems that we're in, and because of the hostility and the mistrust on the other side, and because one of the other pretty well documented phenomena in political science and data around this is that party loyalty is pretty robust. Like, something, I'm going to get the details wrong, but basically the biggest predictor of whether you're going to be a Democrat or a Republican is whether your parents are. And it's
Mm,
just like you like and for whether it's Trump or whatever, we hear about Republicans who are never Trumpers, but it's like if you kind of put a D in your brain about who you are or an R, like that's pretty fixed for life. There's a few moments if you're going to change your political views, it's most likely in college or when you retire. And some hypotheses around that are like that's when you really change your social network.
mm.
But in general, we're so loyal to those parties that then it's like, I feel like I sound conspiratorial, but it's like we're getting played by the people at the top who just want, the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Trumps and the Elon Musk. I guess he's not an elected official, but like the extreme people at the top who kind of want us to be mad at each other and
Yeah.
want us to be upset because they know that we're going to stick with our party line and our trusted information sources. And so it's like you can sort of see that we're getting pulled apart because they're getting more extreme. That's more conspiracy theory on my part.
I don't even know if I'd call it a
No,
conspiracy
yeah, it just
theory. I
feels
mean,
conspiratorial
it's
to
just
say,
no.
right?
I mean, I think you're right though, because the way that Trump and the administration talk about immigrants, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
they are using explicitly radical language to describe them as terrorists and rapists
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot, and
Mm-hmm.
you either have to swallow
Yeah.
all this horrible rhetoric
Yeah.
or or vote against it, right? And
Right.
are you going to vote with, and if you are against it, are you really going to vote a Democrat in? Are you
Right.
sure you want to do that? They're
Right.
soft on the border. So
Right. Right. You're sort of, and this goes back to the observation about like, yeah, you do see more single ticket, like straight ticket ballots where it's like, yeah, if I vote Democrat at the top, it's going to be Democrat all the way down. And part of that is because like there's just no leader on the right that makes any sense to me, and vice versa. Whereas if there may be, and this is the eternal debate, and I do not have an answer here, but the big debate in the Democratic Party right now, right, is the problem with Kamala Harris. Was it that she was pandering to the center and alienated the far left, or was it because she wasn't centrist enough and couldn't pull over some Republican voters? Like, nah. And you can tell whatever story you want, and I have friends with very strong views about either one.
mhm.
The more compelling story to me around that is the simple / boring / depressing one, which is the biggest predictor of the incumbent party losing is the economy. If the economy is not working for people, the incumbent party almost never wins. And unfortunately, well, from my view, that's what happened. And
Mhm.
there's plenty of other ingredients: racism, sexism, fear of
Sure.
migrants, or whatever. But I do think that you could explain a lot of it with a pretty simple, like, people were upset about the economy, and she was considered a continuation of Biden.
Right, which I also find like we came off the back of COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and in fairness, we had an administration that did a lot to better our economy.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of Biden's presidency, we were top of the G7,
Yeah.
and but none of that mattered
Because you're not
because
hearing about it on the right. It's just like,
you're not hearing about it on the left either. I would
well, that's
argue.
true too.
I
That's true
I
too.
would argue that like part of the problem, I don't really have data to show this, but my observation has been that we don't ever talk about the good things we've done
Yeah,
on the left.
that's right.
I never hear anyone talk about how great the bipartisan infrastructure bill was, the American Rescue
Yes.
Plan, the Inflation
Yes.
Reduction Act,
Yes.
the CHIPS Act. I
You're
literally
absolutely right.
the fact that Biden was like the most pro-union president since FDR.
Yeah.
Never hear anyone on the left talk about that
Yep.
except like the left podcasters. But other than them,
Mhm.
it's like no one talks
And they
about it.
probably get a lot of flack for it as well, like the Pod Save America's probably because it is, and this is now I'm treading in my personal opinion slash observation and not peer reviewed research, which is exactly what you're saying, where there's kind of like this, like a what's the word I'm looking for, like a chest thumping on the left to be like, I'm so aware of all the injustices in the world that I
Mm,
will not recognize any success that we've had because that would somehow reveal that I'm not still tortured by all the
right,
injustices. And it's like two
right.
things can be true. I can be pretty horrified by a lot of injustices, and I can recognize, like you said, that like a lot of what the Biden administration did was very impressive, given this very impressive. Full stop.
Yeah.
Another piece of like this now is a bit of data that was told to me by Seth Maskett, who's another great political scientist, who has a great Substack, blah blah blah. He pointed out to me, I was talking to him about the election. He pointed out to me that so in 2024, the economy around the world was terrible for
Hmm.
most developed democracies. And if you look at any country that had an election, the incumbent party lost. Like, and so Harris was one
Hmm.
of all of those, right? It happened everywhere around
Right.
Europe, everywhere. The Harris campaign lost by the smallest margin compared to everyone else. And
Mm.
so there's some hopeful news buried in there, and not that hopeful because we know the outcome, and the outcome is either a 1 or a 0. But there
Right.
is something that says like, and his argument was, he was like, the Harris campaign, like they ran a fantastic campaign. Of course, they needed more time, and
Mm.
there's always gonna be. But in general, the counterfactual of like how maybe Biden would have done if they hadn't switched to Harris, or if there had been like, she did a really great job, and you
Mhm.
just can't defeat the economy. Like people were upset about the economy, and they vote for the outside party when they're upset about the economy. It could be wrong, but I find that to be the most plausible story. So it's like Harris could have done whatever she wanted, and we just would have lost because people felt like eggs were too expensive. Now, of course, you can add
Yeah.
eggs are still expensive. Where the hell are all the Republicans, and why aren't they upset? And that,
Right.
I think, goes back to the ecosystem where it's like they're just not getting the same news that we are.
Yeah. How do you feel about what's his name? I forget the guy, the political theorist who has the keys idea, and even he
Oh,
like
not.
incorrectly projected
Yeah.
the election.
My biggest, and this is a very personal beef, and he doesn't
Oh,
know
okay.
me,
All right.
so
Okay.
yeah, yeah, is that Pod Save America reviewed his work, and they called him a political scientist. And I just want to state for the record that his keys are not political science. That is
Okay.
something else. That is a strange kind of fortune telling. It is not political science. So I feel very,
Okay.
but it's a fair question. I mean, I think that. Some of what he's describing is fair. The economy, is there a scandal? Is there whatever? And it's sort
Hmm.
of like probably a bit better than a 50-50 coin flip. But I don't know that there's anything actually that substantive or
Okay.
scientific about what he's doing. He also
Okay.
seems like kind of a jerk. So that's just a separate observation.
You know what? And I just don't like that guy. No, that's
Yeah,
fine.
and by the way,
Um,
I don't like him. Yeah, no, but I just it's what is it that rubs me the wrong way about him? It's sort of like, it's almost like pseudoscience for politics, where it's just like
mm,
there's this like sense that there's this kind of like precision and formula that could solve it all. And you
mm,
sort of see this. This is really out of my depth. I'm really being extreme here. You sort of see this in like wellness influencers, where it's like we have all this data that shows that these reindeer teardrops cure your whatever, and you're just sort of like,
right.
it all just seems a little too neat and tidy for the world. Like a prediction that I feel that I would take more seriously is one that includes like language around uncertainty and probabilities, and it just sort of
Hmm.
promises a package that's a little bit too easy uh,
Yeah.
to feel good about. But
Well, you're
look,
right.
I wish he'd been right. Like as a person, as a human, I wish he was right.
Yeah, and you're right about the wellness stuff. It is a scourge of the internet. Just to see, like, anytime I read an article on any news source, they're running ads along the sides, like, can pomegranates like fix your kidneys?
Right,
It's like,
right.
uh, it's ridiculous. It is terrible. And they promise progressively more ridiculous things.
Right.
RJ points out, plus a historical memory lapse. I directly remember Reagan winning re-election 1984 on an economy weaker than Biden's 2024. That makes me sad. They should have booted him. Actually, they should have
Wow.
never elected him in the first place, I think.
I
Um,
mean, well, yeah. And James brings up a really good point too, which is, and I don't have a good answer for this, but it's like we all thought the economy and the perception of the economy were the same thing, but that's
mhm.
no longer the case. And so you
Right.
can say, and I actually had a really interesting conversation with Ben Castleman, who's a jobs reporter at the New York Times, where he was saying that like there it's never obvious if you want to say, is the economy healthy? It's like, okay, we look at inflation and we look at GDP and we look at this and we look at that. And on those metrics, Biden's economy was fantastic.
Mhm.
And so it's like, it's doing great. How are you telling us this story about the economy? If you look at different metrics that we don't historically look at, things like affordability and housing and
Mhm.
like that kind of stuff, it was genuinely quite bad. And
Yeah.
so part of the trickiness, and I'm probably sounding more certain than I want to, is like part of the trickiness is like the economy in what respect. And it used to
Sure.
be the case that on any dimension we all sort of agreed as well. So while inflation had come to a halt, and that's good. And so economists are like, great, Biden's doing a good job. Prices are still high. And so
Mhm.
you can quickly tell the story that Biden hasn't done anything to make the economy work for you. And so it's like,
Right.
so what I don't know enough history, and I don't know what the language around Reagan's economy was, but I totally agree with the commenter that like Biden's economy was great in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. Um, this is in my notes, something that you mentioned earlier with regard to our the point about how citizens
Mhm.
aren't really all that divided about most things. One issue that came up recently in the 2022 midterms was like trans issues. Like Republicans
Mhm.
across the board ran on trans issues, but if you look at data around trans issues in that time period, nobody was ever thinking about it. Like
Mm.
consistently, if you looked at like the top 20 most important things that voters or
Mhm.
things that voters found most important, um, trans issues either ranked as like 20 or not
Mhm.
on the board.
Mhm.
But like Republicans just all ran on that for 2022. Like, what's up with
Yeah.
that?
I mean, I think, and this is speculation on my part, around like what I can't speak to is like campaign strategy. And I would imagine that, it's similar to what you've described about abortion going back to say the 60s, where it's like this is something that we think we can get people worked up about, even if it's not actually something that affects their lives, or even if they're stating that they're not interested. And so there is this tension of like, are the leaders trying to get elected by voting by making us see that their views reflect our own, and therefore I'm going to vote for that person? Or are they doing more of a marketing thing where it's like their job is to sell me Sunkissed or whatever, like
Mhm.
like a Coke ad? It's like Coke isn't trying to get the drink that I most want. Coke is trying to
Right.
get me to want Coke.
Right.
And so you're looking at these campaigns, and this is not my area, but like you're looking at these campaigns, like how can we get people worked up? It's like the same thing with immigration. It's like you can make it seem like it's, if you watched the Trump Harris debate, Trump talked about immigration like it was this massive thing. And it's just like, at least in my world, I I was like, are we all sitting around like locking our doors and being afraid? I mean, I'm locking my doors for other reasons, but not because of immigrants,
Right.
you know?
When I oh, do I still have it? Yeah, I do. Yeah, in my notes on the presidential debate, which yeah, I'm sorry to say I took notes while watching the presidential debate.
I'm impressed.
Um
I
what is
watched
it?
like this. I just can't. Again, this is like the scientist versus the citizen. Like as a human, I can't. I mean, I
It
did watch it,
was
but yeah.
like vast majority like Kamala is a pretty good balance of like economic stuff, foreign policies, public policies, a little, and a fair bit of non-policy stuff. But then Trump is like a tiny bit of economic stuff, almost entirely immigration,
Almost entirely.
and then like a little bit of public policies, and then name calling, but like it's just like massively the immigration stuff, um, like if was it MS-13 or whatever, this is like such a big
Mhm.
issue.
Mhm.
Why was
Right.
no one aware of this until January of this
Right.
year? Like
Right.
this
How
is really
convenient.
such a big
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
you
and
know,
there's a similar one with where again you're tapping into these emotions because that gets people because what are campaigns about? The campaigns are trying to persuade you to do something, and that thing is take time out of your day and go through the paperwork of showing up and voting. And what's going to motivate you to do that? Well, the same sorts of things that are going to motivate you to click and share and comment on certain things over others is you're worked up. You think you're under threat. You think that you're furious. You think that there's an injustice. And so the immigration thing is just such an easy way to rile up a bunch of people and think that they're voting because if you don't think there's a threat, you're not going to make it to the polls, and that's probably a lot of what we saw in 2016, where it was like Hillary's going to win and we're going to be fine, and whereas
mhm,
the other side was like we are in an existential, and they're going to show up, um, and so I think the same is true with immigration. I think it's fear, anger, threats on way of life, American culture, that sort of thing. And I think with trans, and we saw it as well with like gay marriage,
mhm,
is there's also you're appealing to like a disgust and
mhm,
like a deep negative emotion of a sense of like this is wrong. And for the record, I don't think it's wrong, but like that was the appeal. And so you saw that in, I forget what election it was, maybe around one of the Obama elections where California, was it Prop 8? I can't remember. California had gay marriage on the ballot and
mhm,
it lost. Like they didn't get gay marriage approved. And some of the thinking was that the idea was let's just put that on the ballot. It's not really going to affect anyone's lives, but it's going to get people to show up to vote. And by the way, those people are going to be conservative. So it's like you're just pulling these different strings to get
mhm.
people worked up over a thing. It doesn't matter what thing, so that they go out and pull the lever for the team that you need them to pull the lever for. And the other thing I think I probably should have been more clear about early on is like all of this work around the ideological distribution of Americans is like, yes, most Americans are moderates and like want relatively functional. Like I would happily take gun control, even if it's not my ideal gun control. I would take a much more conservative gun control as long as it's a gun. Like I would do that. Like I'm open to the compromise, and many Americans are. That's not to say that all Americans are. There's still a distribution, just like we see with
Sure,
the leaders. And so
sure.
there are people super far left, and there's a ton of really hateful people super far right. And this goes back to the social media where it's like those are the voices that we hear. And so it feels like the other side, it's not like we're totally wrong when we say it seems like the other side is filled with hate and they're misogynist and they're xenophobic and they're this and they're Nazis and they're fascists and they're this, because those are the voices that we're hearing. There's
Right.
plenty of people in the middle who just aren't posting diatribes about their moderate views. And so I don't want to let people off the hook and say there are no extreme voices. There
Right.
are, and they're the loudest, unfortunately. But what that means is we tend to assume everyone on the right holds all of those views, when a lot of times they're voting because they're just a registered Republican and they're not paying attention. Does that excuse it? No, but it's not the same thing as saying that every last person who voted for Trump is a Nazi.
Right.
Even if
Um,
it in practice they might as well be because he's in power.
I had a bit in my notes on that I where I kind of take the approach. I kind of take the position of like, does it really matter all that much at the end of the
Exactly.
day in a this two party system? But at any rate, I think you're right on that. Uh, I did want to turn over to a different topic.
Excellent.
Um, so
Nothing more fun than talking about politics on the internet, but yeah, someone's got to do it. But
it's
sure.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy it. RJ says again, we're into source methods territory. Just as creationists don't know about synapsids, most mega are clueless on Trump's actual history of fraud and
Exactly.
incompetence. That is true.
Yeah.
Um, what I wanted to turn the conversation to now is some of your technical work, because
Hmm.
I read a couple of your papers today and I thought they were very interesting.
Awesome.
You wrote a 2010, or you co-authored a 2010 paper in the Journal of the Historical Society,
Hmm.
titled "The Complexities of Global Systems History" with
Hmm.
Scott E. Page.
Hmm.
And so in this paper, you talk about complex systems theory. And so for our audience who may or may not know, so what exactly is this, and how does it differ from kind of the traditional ways that we think about systems?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm so excited you asked about that. I almost never get to talk about complex systems. Do you personally? Do you know that literature? Like, do you follow it, or is
So
it? new to you too. I mean,
Um,
yeah.
sort of. I've dipped a toe in it. I read the book 1177 BC by Eric Klein,
Mhm.
which is about the Bronze Age collapse.
Mhm.
And the final chapter, I guess if you don't include the epilogue, the final chapter of that book, he discusses complex systems theory in terms of the collapse
Mm.
of the Eastern Mediterranean. So the
Mm.
Hittites, the Greeks, the people of the Cypriots, the Canaanites, basically every culture except or every major kingdom except for Egypt collapsed
Mm.
in this time period. And there's been lots of debates as to what happened.
Mhm.
It seems that the kind of initial I don't know if you're familiar with.
No, no, I don't know
Okay,
that.
I was
Yeah.
like, I don't want to be stepping on your toes if
You're
you're
not. No, no.
like,
This is news to
I don't
me.
want to be
Yeah.
I
It
don't want
sounds
to
right, but I'm
I
not
don't
I'm
want
not
to
knowledgeable in this area. Yeah.
mansplain. So
No, you're
you're
good.
like, okay, like, yeah, I already knew that, Jackson. No,
Yeah. No, this
the
is a genuine explain. You're good. Yeah.
there, the initial idea was that like the sea peoples came and just like ransacked and overthrew a lot of these kingdoms, but that seems to be incorrect. It
Mm.
seems that like the places that were initially thought to have been ransacked by the sea people actually had other reasons for their downfall,
Mm.
and most importantly, there was a 300-year drought that affected the whole region, which
Seems like it
caused
would.
famine.
Yep.
Yeah,
Seems
and then you
bad.
had the cascade of effects. The kingdoms can't um, pass materials and food and whatnot between each other, and then you had one kingdom fall like dominoes, and then blah blah blah. And so the final chapter he talks about and kind of criticizes the concept. So this was my intro to it, and then I was reading your paper, and then I had to go back and like kind of reread that chapter
Sure.
because what he sort of says in the book is he says, okay, like, yes, there's a bunch of reasons that these kingdoms fell. Um, and some people call that like complex systems theory, but like, how does that differ from like our sort of basically the question I asked, like, how does that differ
Mm.
from our traditional historical analysis was kind of his point.
Sure, sure. So I don't know enough about how historians think to make that comparison, but what I can tell you is the distinction between a complex systems approach versus like what I would consider it's a pretty mainstream like traditional reductionist approach in
Mm,
science. And in social science, I believe it's true in biology or wherever, but I'll use social science because I'm more familiar with it. In social science in general, the unit of analysis is the individual. Why does the individual vote? Why does the individual buy this cereal and not that cereal? Why does this individual have this psychological problem? Whatever, right? And we through kind of the reign of economics, we have then a bunch of math that says here's how we're optimizing and here's the game theory and here's how we're choosing, and it's all just individuals and we're just trying to understand individuals. And so complex systems is a field that originated from a whole bunch of economists and a whole bunch of physicists getting together in New Mexico and saying like, why don't we just talk to each other for a week and see if we have anything in common? And I'm oversimplifying, but there's some interesting books about the history of this. And basically, for most of the week, they were just like, "We don't know what you're talking about. We think you're wrong. Like everyone thinks you're wrong." And then finally, they realized they were like, "Well, one thing that's similar is if we kind of strip away whether we're in a market or we're in like a biological ecosystem, is we're really dealing with systems of actors. So yes, we're individuals making a choice, but we're individuals making a choice in a context, usually a social context, but it could just be like a non-social context. Even birds are in a social context, right?
mm,
And so it started to be a field of like, oh, how can we understand that kind of the math of the behavior of systems of individuals who are doing the best that they can with the information they have, but they're also simultaneously responding to others around them. And one of the jokes, I don't even know if this is real. It might be real, but there's some
apocryphal.
maybe one story of uh complexity lore basically is some esteemed professor goes to some group of economics PhD students and they say, all right, write a formula to figure out if you're going to give a standing ovation. Do you know the standing ovation problem?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so they go to a bunch of economists and they say, it sounds like I'm setting up for a joke. I'm not. They go to a bunch of economists and they say, okay, create like a mathematical equation to figure out when you would give a standing ovation after a show. And all the economic grad students came up with things that were like, if the show is better than the cost of me standing and the energy expelled, and I think the signal that I want to send it, da 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 da. And then they asked a group of, sociologists or something, and they said, make a model. And the sociologist said, oh, the model is is the person next to me standing up or the person in front of me. And none of the economists thought of, this is, again, I'm oversimplifying.
Yeah.
And so that's
Okay.
kind of at the heart of this, which is like forever, we just sort of treated people like the lone wolf, like I'm out here and I'm buying things and I'm optimizing and I'm getting the job and I'm consuming leisure and and that gets us pretty far. But complexity says, yeah, but we're doing that around other people who are also making those decisions. And a lot of the decisions that we're making, this gets back to all the political stuff we just talked about, are really a response to all these other people. If I'm at the store, I can optimize over which version of Cheerios I'm going to get. Or if I see 3 people go and get the same apple cinnamon Cheerios, I'm just going to get that one, and that's how you see like cascades and fads. And so complexity is the study of individuals embedded in the system. And so the system itself becomes the unit of analysis as opposed to the individual. And one of the hallmarks of complexity is that the interactions of these individuals, whether they're people or birds or fish in a school of fish or whatever it is, the interactions of these individuals can give rise to outcomes that are both, I'm going to sound a little bit wind chimey here for a second, but outcomes that are both greater than and different from the sum of its parts. So it can take on a life of its own. So think of a flock of birds, right? One of the simplest ways, and now I'm going to mansplain to you, one of the simplest ways to model the behavior of a flock of birds is each bird moves based on what the bird nearest it does. So this bird moves to the left, I'm going to move to the left. And what that gives you, all the birds are doing is making local decisions. They're not saying, we as a flock are going to go this way, and we as a flock are going that way. But the flock becomes its own entity. It's a flock that we can look at and we can admire, and it's different every time. But there's also properties that we can predict. It's going to form a roughly a size of this kind of within this range. It's going to move this much, but we can't predict. So another way to think about complexity is it's system behavior that is somewhere between order and chaos. So it's not like you can never predict. The birds are just chaos. It's like you can kind of get a sense of what's going on, but it's not order. It's not like the birds are just going in maybe geese, but like the birds are just going in a line, and we can predict every time. And so a lot of like traditional economics and rational choice theory about humans is much more like we're seeking an equilibrium. There's a supply and a demand, and that's where price will live. Whereas really complexity is saying, well, humans are in a market and they're kind of all going to want Labubu dolls or Tickle Me Elmo or whatever, because that's what everyone else has. And they're not optimizing over anything. And so it's just a really beautiful, I think, way of thinking about big outcomes. So in politics, it's like political protests can be a complex system, and they can take on a life of their own and kind of become a national movement, or they can kind of dwindle.
Circle back to that.
Yeah, or they can kind of dwindle and not really go anywhere, right? Traffic jams are a good example of a complex system where it's like we don't leave the house and say, I'm going to cause a traffic jam. We all make our own local decision because I need to get to work at a certain time. And most of us are trying to just avoid the traffic. And because we're all doing that, we just created this thing that you can map and you can kind of use like math and physics to predict, like the movement of the traffic jam is sort of its own entity, right? The immune system is a complex system where it's basically you've got a bunch of interacting parts that are interacting over a network and both trying to do the best for themselves, but also responding to what everyone else is doing. And so it's this just really cool interdisciplinary field of science that like we never hear about. Like during the financial crisis in 2012, when you were like 6 months old, a book came out called Black Swan. That was kind of one of the
Nassim Taleb.
Yeah. That was one that kind of popularized these ideas.
You stole
which is
my
like,
example.
Oh, did I? Yeah. Which is that, where it's like a lot of times you don't see big major things, but every now and again you see a big event like a financial crisis or like the biggest flock in the world or like a tornado or whatever. Anyway, so I could talk about this forever. But the point of that paper was to say that, there may be value to examining history through a systems lens. And it could be that we were full of shit because maybe history is the same based on what you just said. Maybe historians were already doing that, but whatever it was that we were responding to was still was much more in the reductionist field. Like if we could just understand what this president was doing, we could understand everything. And it's like, no, you need to embed the president in a broader context.
Well, I think that there's I think the way that you explained it was very well, and I think in some ways you could almost say that like Klein's kind of response to that is kind of ahistorical almost. Because like in your paper you mention how, and you can talk about like the local rules interacting, like you can't explain the financial crisis in terms of like one person defaulting on their mortgage,
That's
right?
Yeah.
or 10 people doing it. It is a much broader series of things in that. And you can talk about, maybe RJ can come up with an example out there, but we refer to in our book that we wrote, we talk about the idea of monocausism. That's
Mm-hmm.
where basically you
Hmm.
have one thing, and this one thing here is what was the domino that set everything else in motion. And it's like, that's almost never true. There are very few examples, but if you look at,
It's a nice delusion, though. It's comforting to think that we could
right,
we could get to it. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and like a lot of times, a lot of books will oversimplify things.
Mm.
They'll say this was the one thing that caused everything else, or the one person, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you can't really do that. And I'm sure that that happened in history. It's happened in science many, many times. And we've, as science has matured, uh, it became more of like, well, actually, it was kind of a confluence of different things that all sort of
Yeah.
interacted together. And so I like the way that you explain that. And I maybe Klein would say that, like, okay, well, we're doing systems analysis now,
Yeah.
but like,
Sure.
back, 100 years ago, the idea was, I mean, even it talks in the first chapter of the book about how the thinking was the sea peoples just came in and swept all the
Mm-hmm.
kingdoms. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, we know that's not true anymore because we've
Mm-hmm.
done better analysis of it. So I think you're right. It kind of like almost undercuts his own point, there.
There's
Um,
there's really interesting and these are not my areas of expertise, but there's really interesting graphs of like if you look at if you can probably find it if you just image search like causes of World War One or
mhm.
something. And you end up with these like gnarly looking graphs that are like because of this. I mean, I remember being in school and being like, it was the assassination of the Archduke friend, whatever.
Right.
And it's like
Mhm.
that was the thing. And don't assassinate
That
the
was
Archduke
the
if you
one
don't
thing.
want to. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like you could tell so many causal stories and they're all right and they're all the
Right.
complexity lens I think is a really helpful one. It's not to say it's the only one. I think that's the value to holding multiple lenses at a time, but I'm glad that you wrote about this because I do think that we often are lulled into a sense of like I must find the cause, or like what is it that caused me to get cancer or what is it that so I get really bad migraines and I only recently was informed that one of the leading hypotheses around migraines is that it's no one trigger that causes it. It's if you've kind of exhausted your bandwidth on multiple, and there's sort of like a
Mhm.
threshold effect after which your brain just kind of like you got a little bit less sleep and not quite enough water and the brain pressure. So there's no one thing, and so we often do.
Mhm.
And this again goes back to the politics where it's like you're not going to win an election on a story of nuance, or like complexity, or like, well, it was really, if you think the economy's not doing great, it actually is. And here's a number of things why. And this is why they like you've lost it. You need to get up there and scream about something. And then people are going to
Right.
listen to you. And so I forget where I was going with that, but basically it's like, I think the more, uh, there's other research out there and other graphs that are like, what are the causes of obesity? And I don't mean to be like fat phobic that
Right.
that's a horrible thing, but like there's
There's the one
lifestyle
cause,
and
yeah.
there's genetics and there's your social circles and there's your level of activity. There's a
It's
million
actually because 'cause
things.
you're a bad person, that's
And I
why.
think it's because of your moral failing. I think that's right.
You're right,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, easy, done, next. Yeah.
Why are you homeless? Because you were, you're bad with money. Next,
Yeah. Yeah. Easy. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
and and that's where it's like reality is complex. And to
yeah,
solve these things, you need nuance and not no one, but the loud voices are not the
right.
yeah. Yeah.
There are so many like interesting parallels to be drawn between like complexity theory and biology, for instance. Like
Yeah.
you can't predict at any layer like of an organism that the next layer would be constructed from like the bits
Mm.
below it. You know,
Mhm.
like
Mhm. Mhm.
a tissue has a series of functions that individual little cells don't have,
Yes,
right? It
exactly
can
right.
like bend towards light as a unit, or it can propagate this signal as a unit. These are like emergent
Yes,
functions, and there's
exactly.
so much research on the concept of emergence, which
Mhm.
we talk about in the papers.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned in the 2010 paper, and I literally just wrote a script that incorporated this.
Mm.
The West Brown Inquist power law relationships,
Mm.
uh, how there are aspects of any system that are like constrained. And so when you're talking about constraints, you gave this example, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just wrote a script on that. Or well, it was included in part of it. and I thought that was
Are
really
you
funny.
referring to like a movie script or like a coding script?
No, YouTube video script.
Ah, YouTube video script. Yeah.
We're doing a series called The Ancestor's Tale, where we go
Whoa.
through Richard Dawkins' book, The Ancestor's Tale, and Ian Wong, and they go backwards to the evolutionary history of life, and so we are analyzing it chapter by chapter. And
Hmm.
we're almost done. We've been at it for like 5 years, and we're almost done.
Wow, that's a big undertaking. Well done. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
but one of the chapters is the cauliflower's tale, in which he uses the cauliflower as
Hmm.
the the pilgrim in like as an analogy for Chaucer's Canterbury, to tell the about the history of the web theory of power law scaling,
Mm.
which is super interesting because
Mm.
like whether you're a cauliflower or a redwood or a blue whale or a bacterium, your ability to do a certain set of metabolic processes
Mhm.
is constrained
Mhm. Mhm.
along this
Mhm.
line.
Yeah.
Right, there's this
I love a
one.
power law. Yeah.
Right, yeah, this is a one specific line. It has this specific slope, and like it doesn't matter what you are,
Mhm.
you're gonna fall on that line. That's like just that blows my mind.
Have you read the book Scale by Jeffrey West? I
Have
feel like
not.
you would love it. It's by he's a physicist and a complexity guy, and it's written based on his collaboration with a biologist. He and a biologist sat together for like a year and tried to understand each other. And it's basically that. It's like, and it's not even just like, fleas and dogs and humans and whales and trees. It's like cities and like other things that are like humans have
Mm,
made. Corporations, no, corporations don't scale. They get to a certain size and they're brittle and they kind of fall apart. But like
mm,
cities as these sort of organic emergent outcomes, they all, so the laws of scaling, it's exactly what you're talking about, and it's like it's like a deep dive into every way that scaling shows up. Basically,
okay,
it's really cool.
that is pretty cool. Yeah, I just love the idea that like whether it's the capillary, in
Mm-hmm.
your circulatory system, or the tracheal system of a fruit fly, or the xylem of a
Mm-hmm.
of a cauliflower. It's the capillary, that very final bit of the fractal pattern, the
Mm-hmm.
network, is going to be the same size. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. It's always the
Mm-hmm.
same size. Like
Well,
that's
and that's
just
the like,
so
yeah, like the
crazy.
scale free. I mean, and I remember when I first learned about power laws, I was just like, this is it. Like so much for looking
Hmm.
for a single cause. I was like, this explains it all because it's like language follows a power law, like frequency of how we use words and like
Hmm.
best-selling books and hit songs. It's like most books and most songs no one hears and no one reads, but a few are just like the Harry Potters and the Sabrina Carpenters and the whatever.
Right.
And it's like it's all the same as like the same thing that you're seeing in the metabolic rate in whales. Like it's all the same. And I was just like, this is the theory of everything. It's amazing. Uh,
Yeah.
I've backed off my theory of everything, but I love a power law.
Well, it seems like if you have a theory of everything, you can have a really popular YouTube channel. I mean, just look at
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the Weinsteins, or Sabina Hassenfelder, or
Yeah.
whoever. You just need
Yeah.
a theory of everything,
Just one
Um,
theory of everything away from YouTube domination.
yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed that paper. I thought it was really neat. Your talk, you're like when I was reading that the bit about robustness
Mm,
made me be like, oh, I've seen this before somewhere,
mm,
and then I like went over to my bookshelf. You did another paper in 2013 titled "The Complexity of System Effects"
mm-hmm.
that I thought was also really interesting. Um, it tickled my brain in a different way. The one of the things you talk about the is you discuss the housing market crash,
Mm.
and in you are looking at one of the distal causes of it, not necessarily the. Is my camera working? Yes, it is. You're talking about one of the distal causes, which involves China in that,
Mm.
um, uh, which was interesting to me because in the book, so Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway, they wrote a book titled "The Big Myth" after they did
Mhm. Mhm.
um, Merchants of Doubt, which I also
Mhm.
highly recommend. I never thought I'd read a 500-page book on economic history, but there I was.
Mhm.
Very, very good. But one of the things they attribute one of the primary causes back in the late 90s, that was kind of setting the stage, was the deregulation of the financial sector
Mm.
by the Graham Leach-Bliley Act, which overturned or repealed the 1933 Glass-Steagall Act. And their argument is that this aspect of deregulation kind of lay the foundation for precipitating the like subprime mortgage crisis. And in your paper, you point to a different hypothesis that, I mean, it's not any means contradictory. It's like these things are probably occurring together. Sure. Could you explain the way that the China sort of fits into that?
I would love to, but I have not looked at that paper in a really long time.
Oh, that's okay.
So I don't actually remember what we said about it, but I do remember. I would be making things up if I'm going to look at the paper myself. Maybe it jogged my memory. Sorry.
No, that's perfectly fine. It is also in the chat for anyone who wants to read all the articles that we discuss. They are all in the description in the video, so everybody can go read about those.
This is like, oh yeah, complexity of system effects, right? I'm just gonna refresh my right.
Yes.
Tipping points. China's role in the formation of the United States housing bubble. Right. God, I could not tell you. I have no idea. I have no idea what we said. I'm sure it was very good.
That's okay. I thought it was really interesting because.
Okay, you want to tell me what it was? I cannot remember.
Well, the point of it was I thought it was interesting, and it goes to your point about complex systems theory, because you're like, here's one reason, or here's an important reason that is involved in causing the price of houses to increase, and then the people later defaulted on their mortgages. And I thought that was really neat, because I was like, okay, this is a different way of viewing this than the way that I had read about in the other book, in the book which involved deregulation. And so that was one of those instances of like, okay, this is not an example of monocausism. There are these multiple effects that led to a tipping point, some might say. Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting. You a bit later in the paper talk about the rise of China and why China never went through an Arab Spring.
Yep. I was just gonna say, I was looking at this and I was like, yes, the Arab Spring part I do remember.
Can you talk about why China never went through an Arab Spring?
Yeah. So I mean, again, this is less meant to be like, this is the story of why, and more meant to be like, what does a complexity lens offer in terms of thinking about why China didn't go through an Arab Spring? So for those who are much younger than I am, the Arab Spring was in what, 2011, 12? Do you remember the Arab Spring? Yeah. Are you good on that, or do you need me to tell you?
I mean, this is an area that I had to read about. I wasn't cognitively present for, but please tell me about it. Tell our audience.
It was such a big deal. I feel like my grandmother when she tried to tell me about Pearl Harbor, and I was like, "Shut up, no one cares." Oh my God, I'd die.
No, please tell my audience.
I would love to tell
probably lots of other people who.
Yeah, gather around, children. Your Nana has something to tell you about the Arab Spring, which is that. So the Arab Spring is a wonderful example of a complex system, and again, that hallmark of a complex system is this emergent outcome where it kind of takes on a life of its own that no one saw coming, or it was hard to predict, right? And so the Arab Spring is something that came, in my view, relatively organically. There was in Tunisia in 2011-ish, there was a dispute between a food cart salesperson and someone who had a food cart in like the center of town. And I'm not going to get the details right, but like a run-in with the police. And as a protest to the police and the government not letting him make a living, he set himself on fire and like died in the square. And that set off a variety of protests that like came in support of this person. And so it started in Tunisia. It spread, I forget exactly the order. It spread to Libya. It spread to Egypt. And ultimately what we saw were these massive protests around the Middle East that actually toppled regimes. There was a full-on regime change and like a tearing down of dictators. And so in my dissertation, which was on China's media coverage of the Arab Spring, the media coverage in the West, so in the New York Times, for example, was like celebratory. We were jubilant over here because it was like democracy lives and we're going to see like democracy flourish in the Middle East, this land of dictatorships and blah, 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 blah. And so for like 2 or 3 years, why it's called the Arab Spring as opposed to the Arab Fall. But then there was language later where it was like, we might be in an Arab winter. But for a brief while, it seemed like the people had really spoken and demanded a democracy. And then, of course, the U.S. got involved and we started killing leaders, and things got messy,
Mm.
as they are wont to do when we start taking a
Tends to
look.
happen.
Yeah. So various leaders were killed, but you could then ask the question, wow, what caused the Arab Spring? And there's a lot of really interesting work around like the role of social media. At that time, most of the Arab Spring communication was thought to be through Twitter. And so there was this big time of research in, again, I sound like I'm talking about the dark ages, but this big swell of research about how social media was going to be this pro-democracy force around the world. And boy, was it, until it wasn't, and but for a while, there's a lot of optimism around the role of it, because you didn't have to rely on leaders to control the spread of information. You could do it peer to peer. And that was like this amazing network effect. Well, in China, you don't have that, right? There's like a massive top down control. And you also have a lot of people without full access to the internet. There's like massively stamped out social media control. Even simple things, I'm going to get the details wrong, but simple things like on a lot of Chinese social media, you couldn't do the equivalent of retweet, which really slows down the ability to share information. Even on Instagram, now you can retweet on Instagram, but you have to like take a screenshot and then post the thing and then move it on. And so I forget exactly what the details are for our case, but basically China prevented this emergent outcome from happening by limiting the ability of the network effects to take over. And my particular research in my dissertation, separate from this paper, was that China brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly, I walked away from my dissertation on Chinese censorship being very impressed by China, which is not a popular take. They very brilliantly, so when we think about authoritarian censorship, we tend to think about it as like, I'm going to just block all news I don't like. And that's what China did until the internet came along. And then the internet comes along, which is very much along when the Arab Spring comes about. They did something brilliant, which is a lot of what the politicians in the US do, which is they said, I'm going to tell you the news, but I'm going to give you a very specific angle about the news. So I'm going to shape the narrative. And so the narrative that China brilliantly enacted about the Arab Spring was, one, how destabilizing it was, how bad it was for everybody. So no one's going to copy that.
Right.
How they hoped for peace and stability in the region, and how they were doing such an amazing job rescuing Chinese nationals who were working in the region and bringing them safely home. Like the vast majority of headlines in the national paper in China at that time were all about China's rescue missions to bring workers home. And that's where it kind of gets to misinformation a little bit before we even called it misinformation, because like it was all true. It's exactly what was happening. But it wasn't the full context. I think the context we saw in the West was also not the real context, because it was like everyone is fighting for democracy and no one's upset about it at all. And it's like, no, people's lives got pretty wrecked. And so the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Anyway, so all of that is to say is that China basically is a great example of when we see a protest take off, we tend to say, wow, what caused the protest to take off? And we tend to do less of like, well, why didn't it take off elsewhere? Or why didn't other protests like it? Because China has had its share of protests. And so the idea is that this network effects, they were able to stymie the network effects. And so you don't see that sort of thing happening in China. That's awesome. One lens on it. Yeah.
I thought that aspect of the paper was fascinating, because I really only fairly recently read about Arab Spring. My descent into like history and stuff has only come very recently, and so as I'm reading more about like Middle Eastern history and stuff, that's how I came. One of the books I'm reading right now is down here, All the Shah's Men, which is about how we overthrew Iran back in the 50s. And then all the great things that happened after that. So good.
Universally wonderful.
Everyone thought it was a great idea.
Every time the U.S. is like, we're going to mess with who's in charge in this random country that isn't us, it goes great. There's no problem.
Every single time. Not once.
We draw lines between countries. We demarcate. Problem free. Yeah.
One thing that was interesting to me is humanity kind of keeps coming up with way, and I guess sometimes it's right, but it seems like every time that we have something that allows us to be more connected, whether it's social media or the internet proper or television or radio or whatever,
the printing press and whatever,
the printing press. Yeah, I actually have a book on my shelf about the history of the printing press. I have not gotten around to reading yet, but there's always this like optimism about how it's going to positively shape the world. And sometimes that's right. It just
Mhm.
happened.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
Edward Snowden said the exact same things about the internet back in the 90s, right? And I'm sure a
Mhm.
lot of people did. A lot of people were like, yeah, we have a computer, or once we have a computer in every household, everyone's going to be super geniuses. We're all going to
Mhm.
have access to, they didn't have Wikipedia at the time yet, but,
We called it the
whatever.
information superhighway. I mean, that's
Yeah.
insane. Like, it was just wow. Like,
Yeah.
and we're all gonna be friends. So I'm like yelling now. We're all gonna be friends with each other because we're all gonna get to know each other. So boundaries will
Mhm.
dissolve. And that lasted about a third of a second before anyone went into a chat room and was like, horrible things were being said.
Yeah. Yeah. I, um, by the way, Snowden's book is okay.
Mm,
There's about a third of it that could just be cut out. I don't know why his editor let him get away with that, but
okay.
uh, I like Snowden. I just want to say that.
Yeah, no,
But
I'm
like
I'm I'm intrigued. Yeah.
his book is way too. There's way too much information.
Look, you can do a lot
But
of important things and not be a good book writer. It's okay.
that's fair.
Yeah.
But part of that is, yeah, he spends the first third of the book talking about his childhood. And I'm like, I don't really care that much about your childhood. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's not the reason anyone cares about you.
Yeah.
But,
Like, this
but
is a story about my love affair with asparagus. You're like, bro, read the room. Like, that is none of us want to hear about it.
right.
Yeah. 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 Fair.
Um, he went to Russia and like, no, the whole Snowden affair didn't occur till like what 2012 or 2013, something like
That
that. It
sounds
was during
right.
yeah, it was during
Yeah.
Obama's administration. He didn't go to Russia
Yeah.
till after that.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so he talks about his childhood and how like, oh yeah, it's so cool that everyone now has internet access. And in fairness, to a degree, it is pretty cool. It's cool that we can talk to each other. I think
It
this
is
is
cool.
really neat. I've met a lot of really cool people through the internet, but also, yeah, it is it's definitely not changed humanity's capacity for like evil. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh,
It does seem like, and this is pure speculation, but yeah, it does seem like these technologies, and I think we're seeing it with ChatGPT, where I think right now there's a lot of optimism about it. There's some
yes,
some serious skepticism, but like by and
yes,
large, you open any news source and it's like, here's the next way that apart from like, shit, college students don't know how to write. Like, people seem pretty excited about it, and that I
yeah,
think we're gonna quickly get over. But yeah, it's almost like, so I just did an interview with someone who is an editor for the World Happiness Project, World
okay,
Happiness Report, which is like the annual report of like what's the happiest country, what makes people happy, blah blah blah. And my point in bringing that up is that one of the things that she has worked on in her lab, which is the Helping and Happiness Lab, is that being generous, acts of kindness, make us happier. Every time if I am given $1 and I can spend it on myself or someone else, if I spend it on someone else, that makes me happier than if I spend it on myself. And so you hear that and you're like, well, why aren't we all nice to each other all the time? Why am we all not just give? And it's because we don't know that. We think the money spent on ourselves is going to make us happier. And
Mhm.
so we more often than not, and then we do it for someone, we say, oh, I would feel better. I'm going to remember that. And then we don't. It's like this. I forget there's a term for it in psychology that it's like we're bad at like affective predicting. Like, we're not good at figuring out what's going to make us feel good. All of that is to say is
Mhm.
that we have these like pro-social tendencies built into us where it's like we want to be kind to our neighbors. In general, there are all these studies that are like, if you lost your wallet in your neighborhood, what are the odds you think you would get it back?
Mhm.
And people are like 20%. And then they do studies where they walk through different neighborhoods and they leave wallets around and like 80% are returned. So
Right.
we also have we have like a draw towards pro-social behavior, towards generosity. We feel better when we do these altruistic things, but we don't trust other people and we don't want to like, we forget that it's going to make us feel better. So in our day-to-day lives, we like make micro choices that make us worse off, even if a very small tweak would make us happier. And
Mm.
my point in saying all of that
Me
is I
going to
am,
McDonald's for lunch, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I
Uh-huh.
am now thinking that technology accelerates our experience in that way. It used to be that it was like, oh, I'm going to do this thing where it's like, I would have to walk to the store and I'd have to do this and
Mhm.
I'd do that. But now it's like, I can go on the internet and do 10 things in a row that I think are going to make me feel better and they're all going to make me feel worse. And I'm going to like, if I think no one's going to return my wallet in real life, what are my assumptions about how people are going to treat me online? Like, and the internet, the algorithm rewards nasty behavior and all of that kind of
Right.
stuff. So I do think it's like, I think it's kind of a mirror of ourselves where it's like intrinsically there's a lot of good, but our fears and our bad judgment get the better of us. And I'm convinced that technology accelerates printing press, right? Like wow, we're all going to learn different things. Well, and now there's like, what was it? Yellow journalism or whatever. And
Right.
like slop news. Like even then, like it was
I mean,
instantly abused. And like, this is why
propaganda.
we can't have nice things. You know, it's
I
because
mean,
we just,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Um, the propaganda campaign of the, I mean, I'm not saying it was necessarily a bad thing. It was positive propaganda for us to enter World War One.
Yeah.
Really reflected so poorly on journalists that they were like,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to change the way that we do journalism. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
be like extremely rigorous in our methodology for ascertaining facts now,
Yeah.
because people were like, well, hold on a second, didn't the newspaper just work with the government to like
Yeah.
convince us large scale to go to war? Like, I mean, I think it was a good thing that we did that ultimately, but I can understand the feeling of like my opinion was changed and I
Yeah.
didn't even really realize it. You know, that's kind of a scary thought.
I mean, and there's research that shows that that sort of effect. I mean, it's Bush and the invasion of like
Hmm.
Iraq, you know, or yeah, and you know, now you look at Trump and Fox News, and it's like best friends forever. But yeah, I mean, the news has sort of had a strange relationship, and for a while, like the whole integrity of it was like, I'm not going to be related to what the president is saying, and I'm not going to try to further it. But yeah, I mean, and I think the internet has completely collapsed that because journalists. Who needs journalists when you have random people with microphones?
That's true. Yeah, I would never give in to that
No,
temptation, but
never. No, no. We'll leave it to the experts. Yeah.
um, so I suppose the last thing, or actually there was one more thing before we get to the last thing.
Okay.
Um, uh, Chomsky makes an analogous point. I know I'm being pretentious, the guy who keeps
A real
referencing
Chomsky
Chomsky.
head over here. Yeah, I like
I
it.
listen. I have like 7 of his books, 6 or
Oh, okay.
7 on my shelf up there. You can't see them, but
No,
they're
I
all on
have
the
like
top.
two, so I'm nowhere near. Yeah.
I know RJ. I'm sorry. I love Chomsky. He's my dear old man. I but
He's still
he
alive, right? I can't remember.
well, alive as a,
Yeah, fair.
you know, he's
He's
like
like
had a
in
stroke and he's 9,000 years old, and I think he's I any day now we're
yeah.
expecting the
Like the
you know,
obituaries are long since written.
yeah, one of the obituary writers died. Even waiting so long for Chomsky to
No.
pass. Yeah, that was a story that was like
I missed
what,
that.
earlier this year or something like that. Yeah, one of the obituary writers died. But yeah, I mean it's gonna happen like fairly soon. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
one of the points he makes in uh, uh, Who Rules the World is that there was a sort of analogous early development between like the United States and Egypt for a while,
Hmm.
because both were ramping up technologically because they both had cotton,
Hmm.
and so their industries were dramatically expanding. But of course, in the case of Egypt, they were not able to continue their industrial expansion because of England basically put the boot on them and was like, no, uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
For all the hating I've done on the U.S. getting involved in other countries, England has some explaining to do. I'll say.
that's true.
Yeah.
That was I was thinking of that because of the like the parallel between like why did Arab Spring happen over
Yeah.
here for a bunch of countries, but it didn't happen for China, and so
Yeah.
like why did industrial
Yeah.
uh, expansion occur for the U.S. but didn't occur for Egypt? But anyway, um, the last thing you mentioned this via email. You said, and I agree with this. Data isn't just for math people.
Mm.
Everyone can learn to work with data.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I would love to clear your next 2 hours because I have a lot to say on this. No, I will keep it brief, but I will say that so I taught data science at NYU for 3 years, and I speak about it now, and I teach sort of more public facing courses for non students, and it breaks my heart every time where I say we're going to work with data, or like here's some interesting things in the data, and they say, oh, I could never be a part of that, like I'm not a math person, like blah blah blah. You're like, oh, it's so heartbreaking because one, the math you can get pretty far with a mean, like you can't,
Mhm.
there's limits, but like you can get pretty far. And the other piece of it is that, and I credit my political science degree with this, which is the act, and this is kind of where we started the conversation, which is like the act of turning something you care about in the world into data
Mhm.
is as much a philosophical, if not more, a philosophical exercise than it is a math exercise. I mean, you want to have some sense of, but really, it's much more. You need subject matter expertise. You need creativity. You need to look at the problem in a fresh way. And I'm glad you asked about the polarization research. A, I think it's super important and relative to our times. But B, it's a great example to me of like we all thought we were super polarized, But it wasn't until we sit down and said, well, if we are polarized, like how would it show up in the data? Would it be ideologically? Would it be our party identification? Would it be how we're voting? And the answer is like, no, no, no. Would it be on particular policies? With the exception of the two we talked about, not really. It turns out the polarization is we all hate each other. And I just summarized 20 years of research of really smart people being like, why can't we think it's like you go to the doctor and you're like, I feel sick. And they're like, your temperature's fine, go home. It's like, we're just not looking at it the right way. And so a lot of the big innovations in science in general, but like anytime you're working with data, which is where I tend to spend my time, like it comes from looking at a problem in a new way and then saying, well, let me check that with some evidence. And lots of times that's data. It could be qualitative data too, or could be whatever. Anyway, all of that is to say is that like, I think it's a real shame. And I think we're limiting our ability. This is going to be my big soapbox for the night. We're limiting our ability as a species to make discoveries by keeping people who are really either subject matter experts or like creative thinkers or out of the box thinkers. These people are not involved in the STEM fields because of this. And it's like, we're guilty in the STEM world of like putting up these walls. Like, yeah, well, you do have to be a math person because I'm so smart. And it's like, there's so much room for, I think the lowest hanging fruit for collaboration and for discovery is between technical and non-technical, but experts in other areas collaborating. And a lot of the big innovations are like, yes, there's technical skills, but it took looking at the world in a new way and applying those technical skills to make the innovation. And so I'm on this like new mission to get everyone in the world to think about data and talk about data and engage with data. You don't have to make normal distributions and love power laws as much as you and I do, but you do need to not be afraid of numbers and say it's just a way of describing the world. And do I think this description reflects the world that we live in? Yes or no? And then just asking that question can open up all kinds of philosophical. There's a lot of ways you can contribute to data that are like philosophical or like measurement and things like that have nothing to do with proficiency in math. So I just get so upset. And one thing I will say, I am generally nervous about AI and LLMs and generative AI, regular AI, whatever. Not whatever, but generative AI makes me very nervous. However, it does mean you don't really have to know how to code anymore. Like you need to know some, but you can do a lot more in the data science world with a lot less experience in the coding. That was a big barrier. Like, I want to get into data science. I'm going to go do a Python boot camp for 2 years. Forget it. Talk to me for a week and I'll tell you what you need to know. And you can do the rest, check your work if you're going to start making big policy claims or whatever. But we all have e-bikes now on that front. So a lot of the math requirements are diminished. Again, it's not, I worry about saying that and ending up with like 10 new AI slot papers that are anti-vax or something like that. But like the problem is, it's like the really thoughtful people who are like, I could actually probably come up with a creative way to persuade anti-vaxxers to try the vaccine because a lot of my neighbors are anti-vaxxers. Like those people don't realize that they need to talk to the doctors. Anyway, I'm on a tangent, but it's not just for the math people. That's my that's the story.
Yeah, I am not really a math person. I think the highest math I took in my undergrad was Calc 2, and like I take statistics, of course. But then when I was doing my master's degree, I had to take a biostat class, which was not even really math so much. It was more data analysis. Like you're not doing any of the mathematical stuff. You're just being given a set of data points, and then you have to decide which test, whether it's like the Tukey test or Wilcoxon or whatever. You have to use that to analyze your data and then get all your p-value and all that sort of stuff. And when I took that class, at first I was kind of like meh about it, but like I really enjoyed it. And that also helped me read technical literature better when I was taking that class, because like then I could go and read technical works and be like, oh well, this is their conclusion, but like their data says that like they got barely like almost equivocal results, basically.
Or there's a lot of like, oh, it's statistically significant. You're like, okay, but the effect size is like 0.00001. And you're like, bro, we are being... And I guess let me amend what I said before. It's not that you don't need math to do things with data. You can do a lot with data without math, but also the math that you do use and like the statistics really to make sense of data is not we make it seem more unapproachable than it is. Like I
Mm.
don't think it's impossible. Like if think of how wonderful the world would be if everyone understood how to interpret a p-value. Like I think
Mhm.
there's like 10 key statistical concepts that like if we could just kind of drill into people's heads would get us a long way. Whereas in my mind, it's like there's sort of a haves and have nots where it's like I will not touch numbers and I will not talk about statistics and I will not do any programming. Or it's
Mhm.
like we have people who are like, I am doing the most elite statistics in the entire world. And it's like economic inequality for like math access. Like there's a lot in here. And so I'm so thrilled you had that. I had that same experience. I was not a math person growing up. I avoided math at all costs, got to grad school thinking I was going to write essays about like the nature of war and peace. And they made us do math. And I was
Mhm.
like, what the hell is this? And then after some like brute force, I was like, this is really useful. And a lot of
Yeah.
it is really hard, but you can also get pretty far with like some solid basics. Like so much of the misinformation around like health stuff is
Mm.
because they're just throwing science sounding stuff. And if you have like a sliver of a comb to kind of go through it, you can do exactly what you just described, which is like, this doesn't make any sense. Or like, this doesn't actually have an impact. Or like, you tested it in such a narrow way that the claims that you're making are preposterous
Yes.
compared to what's actually in there.
That's the really big one. I feel like okay, we gave a tiny amount of dark chocolate to these mice,
Mm-hmm.
and so
Exactly.
like they had better kidney function or whatever, and so
Yes.
therefore if you eat a square of dark chocolate a day, that helps your heart or whatever. It's like but the problem is the magazine that is relaying to you, whether it's Reader's Digest or whatever, that find is like doing such a crap job of it, and
Mm-hmm.
then 95% of the people who read that are just being like, well, okay, so dark chocolate is good for you, whatever. And
Yeah.
like they're never going the step further to be like, where'd they get that data?
Right.
That's the other part. We got to force people to check your sources,
Right. Right.
as you know, and that's uh, reading your citations or checking the sources or whatever is like that's basically what RJ and I did all throughout the book. We just checked.
Mm-hmm.
We co-authored a book about creationism, and so it's
Mm,
just going through like what do creationists say, and then how are they misrepresenting the data, because they're always
exactly.
misrepresenting the data.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and that's where you get into these situations where it's like during COVID, the like arguments that like masks don't do anything, the vaccines
Hmm.
cause whatever. Um, the people making those claims were showing up with studies and everyone on every side of the argument thinks that they have the science to support their claim.
Hmm.
And it's like you can find evidence. And this is the like, today in the news, we find out that coffee causes cancer, and tomorrow we see it cures cancer, and then the next day we see it prevents cancer. Like, which is it? It's like, well, it depends on how you
Right.
study it, because there's a million different ways you can study the effect of cancer on coffee. And so you just see these handpicked, and this again gets back to the algorithms where it's like, if I'm an anti-vaxxer and Instagram knows it, I'm just going to keep getting served up these, like, even if they're real studies, but like not very good and poor research
Hmm.
design. So it's not like AI slop, but it's like, something that is not in a real journal. And you're just going to arm yourself with stuff that you think is evidence. Like we're all walking around here thinking that our evidence is the evidence that supports our view.
Yeah. Um.
So we should
In
all just engage with data, and
Yes,
world
I
peace
agree.
will ensue.
We should all take a biostat class
Yes.
that teaches you all about like experimental design and how to
Yes.
analyze the
Yes.
statistics in paper. Yeah, I agree.
Have a particular fondness for biostats. I have to say, of all the ways, like I've done econometrics and I've done this and like all the
Mhm.
ways into statistical thinking, I find biostats is like, I don't know, it's a precision weapon.
Yeah,
I have a lot of respect for biostats.
yeah. It was an interesting class. I don't know if I'd say it was fun necessarily, but it is
Sure.
useful. It is definitely a
Yeah.
class like I will carry into the future and
Yeah.
use the things I learned. So,
Yeah.
in closing, do you have anything you want to plug? I put in the description your website, and then the papers, the article we talked about, and then the two other technical papers. Is there anything else you'd like to
Awesome.
plug?
Well, thanks for that. The only other thing is I have if you want to be part of the conversation about data, I have a podcast called Behind the Data, and every episode we talk with an expert in some type of data. So like jobs data, the happiness data that I talked about, the political stuff, or I have folks who would do like collect data on sharks by like swimming with sharks and tagging them. It's like super cool. Anyway, so behindthedatashow.com if you want to hear about cool data sets.
Nice.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on with us
Thanks for having
today.
me.
This was a delightful conversation. I very much enjoyed it.
I did too. And I think we are maybe one more conversation away from solving all the problems or finding the one single cause behind them all.
Hey, well, you are always welcome to come back on the show and do another one with us. So, if we get to solving
Yep.
world conflicts and things in the next show, then hey, is what it is.
Perfect. Perfect. Awesome.
Um,
Well, thanks very much. And
and
thanks to
thank you.
everyone who contributed in the comments that I saw.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you all for watching. That's usually the part that I do. So
Oh, sorry.
stole it from me again.
It was so nice to see people and talking. I was like, oh, yeah.
Oh, I have a great uh, group. Hesitate to use the word audience. The group that I've cultivated to that watches creationism stuff with me and climate change stuff and
Mm,
participate in the conversation. Yeah, I have a really great group of people out here. So,
awesome. Well done.
all right. Well, everybody, we will see you all next time. So, bye, everybody.
Bye.